As a novice writer and someone who works full time in the publishing industry, it's part of my job to look out for bad writing. When a potential author's manuscript lands on my desk, I not only look for spelling and other technical errors, but it's my job to look for continuity errors, character errors, plot errors, and marketability. If a book comes to me and it's lacking in the first three areas, those things are fixable. However, a book can be the most well edited, well written, and character driven plot ever, but if there is no market for it, then it won't sell. And if it won't sell, well, then it's been a waste of the publisher's time preparing it and the author's time writing it. And that's kind of how I feel about a lot of the characters that have been created in 2023, most of them unfortunately being female. Modern writers seem to have this idea that if female characters aren't obnoxious, promiscuous, power hungry, narcissistic, enraged harridans, well, then they're not good characters. If they're not humiliating the guys with their words, they're beating them at everything from strengths to smarts to cunning to engineering to politics and everything in between. It's become a competition that is exhausting to watch because, contrary to what a certain part of the 1% of Hollywood thinks, constant conflict, one-upmanship, and showmanship is incredibly tiring. Someone who has no concept of kindness, humility, self-control, or self-awareness is not someone that I am interested in watching or learning about. And I have been exhausted watching every single one of these female characters this year because change a few things like their hair color, eye color, height, species, or power, well, they're all the same. They are all angry beyond reason, they don't take responsibility for their actions, they are narcissistic and delusional, power hungry and obnoxious, uncompromising and cold. And I cannot stand every single one of them. Each and every one of these characters is exhausting to watch on screen, and yet Hollywood just keeps pumping them out one right after the other like an assembly line of garbage. No one likes these characters, no one wants these characters, no one asked for these characters, and yet here they are, existing and demanding our attention because, unfortunately, there are very few good things out there to watch nowadays. I am not ranking these on a numbered basis because then I would have to think very hard about which character is worse than the other in a successive state, and I already have a headache. So they're going to be in no particular order because I have decided I do not want to subject myself and my subscribers to a countdown. Starting at the beginning of the year, we have Cassie Lang from Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. While Cassie is not as bad as the rest of the girls on this list, she is still annoying, delusional, and obnoxious. She is something of an activist, and the first scene that we see of her in Ant-Man 3 is of her being bailed out of prison by her father after she and several protesters were apprehended by the police. Of course, Cassie thinks it's her civic duty to protest the homelessness problem, never mind that without her father, those people wouldn't exist at all. And speaking of Scott helping to save the world, she routinely makes fun of that too, lightheartedly ridiculing his accomplishments as an Avenger, and virtually saying that the world has moved past the events of Endgame and Infinity War, and that it's time to move on. Ever heard of the phrase, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it, Cassie? But history seems to be an integral aspect of why these characters are so awful. Cassie, in all her arrogance and naivete, has no idea of the risk that she's taking, and the movie has the audacity to make Scott out to be the bad guy, when all he really wants to do is protect his daughter. You know, like any good father should. As a result of her meddling in things that she has no business being involved in, he must offer himself up to Kang to retrieve a part of his spaceship in order to save her life. The biggest problem that I have with Cassie is not her careless disregard for her father's accomplishments. It's that she is so easily fixable. She has next to no self-awareness at all until Kang has her trapped. This could have been a great learning experience for her, and a bonding experience with her dad, where she apologizes for her carelessness and recklessness, and follows his lead because he has more experience at being a hero than she does. And yet that seems to last for all of 5 minutes. She was such an easy character to fix, and could have been a likable one, but as a result of the writers in action, she's at best forgettable, and at worst unlikable. But for as disappointed as I am with Cassie's character, she has nothing on the next few females that 2023 threw at us. In May, we had the rise of Queen Cleopatra, by far the worst historical documentary that I have ever watched. I use the term documentary loosely, because documentary would imply that there is intelligence behind the making of this show, and it would be a cold day in hell before I ever use that word in conjunction with this self-delusion that Jada Pinkett Smith and Tina Garavi have given us. From their smug disregard of the history of two countries that can lay claim to the true Cleopatra, to their callous disregard of any other aspects of her other than how powerful she was, to her levels of promiscuity, as if that matters at all in the grand design of who she was, to the audacity of the so-called scholars who place an emphasis on the imagination when talking about Cleopatra, as if her skin color was a thing of paramount importance about her, to the pathetic representations of Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, demoting them from the great men that they were to Cleopatra's lapdogs, to the willful lies about the state of Rome, to the ridiculous acting and writing. Everything about this show is irredeemable, willfully smug, and narcissistic. It is perhaps one of the worst rated shows to have ever been made, and will likely remain so for quite some time. I have made 2 videos on this topic already, and if anyone is interested in hearing more of my thoughts in depth on this abomination of a show, the links to them are in the description down below. The serendipity with which all of this came together was sort of like watching an 18-car pileup in slow motion. Unbelievably awful, but being unable to look away until every facet of the damage is mentally cataloged so you can't forget about it. Maybe I'm giving the show too much credit, because if a lawsuit from the entire country of Egypt isn't enough to get Pinkett Smith, Garavi, and Adele James some shame, well then, nothing is. After all, it's hard to talk sense into a madman, or in this case, mad women. Coming in shortly after the disgrace that was Queen Cleopatra, we have the disastrous failure of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, which was the introduction of Kathleen Kennedy's hilariously awful self-insert Helena Shaw, the daughter of a character that was never present in the original trilogy, so in my mind doesn't really exist at all. Helena, unlike Cleopatra, is not one of those characters that is so bad it's laughable. Instead, she's just one of those characters where the writers poured every possible effort into making her as unlikable as possible. Not only is she disdainful of Indy and all of his accomplishments, she also tries desperately to be him, even while trying to steal a portion of her father's work and selling it on the black market because she's just that much of an awful person. She leaves him behind and frames him for murder. She laughs when his friend dies and offers the most tacit of apologies when he confronts her with her horrible reaction. She disregards his wishes to die in peace, instead insisting that he is needed back in the modern world, and then knocks a 70-year-old man out. But perhaps the worst thing about Helena Shaw is the fact that she has way too much screen time. She is in nearly every single scene from the beginning of the film until the end, and this is far more than any of the other females in the previous Indy films. I might have been willing to overlook it if she was, charming or could contribute to anything of value to Indy's character like Short Round did, or like Marion maybe. But apparently Helena is better than Indy in every way, to the point where he might as well not even be in the film at all. And her presence, while exhausting, makes the entire movie incredibly unenjoyable. If she had been taken out completely, it might have been a watchable film. Maybe even something I was able to like, sans the first 20 minutes. And yet what we were provided with was a soulless, joyless film, filled with characters who were too cynical to drive the plot, a device that had none of the mystique or presence of the Ark of the Covenant, the Shankara Stones, or the Holy Grail, which pretty much rendered it as unmemorable of a MacGuffin as you can think of. But I digress. Helena Shaw was not just unlikable, but maybe the most rage-inducing part of the film. And the fact that there is a scene out there somewhere that was filmed but never green-lit, where Helena Shaw picks up Indy's hat and places it on her own head after what we can surmise is the death of Indiana Jones himself, is just another indicator of how far this movie has deviated from the reasons why fans loved Indiana Jones in the first place. And the fans have made their thoughts on this abomination of a movie quite clear. Will we see Helena Shaw again? Somehow I don't think so. But like cockroaches, these movies and their successors tend to have a long shelf life, and the only way to get rid of them is by cleaning house of the people who greenlit all of these decisions in the first place. I've talked a great deal about Captain Marvel and the Marvels this year, and if you want to see my thoughts on that, some of the videos are in the description box down below. So I won't spend any time talking about Carol Danvers in this video. At this point, she's kind of overkill, and I'd rather not continue talking about Brie Larson, especially since it's becoming more and more obvious that this is likely to be her last outing as Captain Marvel. Thank God. Instead, I want to focus on Photon, which is by far the worst superhero name I have ever heard. Unlike the rest of the characters that I've mentioned, there isn't really anything that's unlikable about her. I use the term worst for her because of just how poorly developed and poorly written that she is. I know that Teyonah Parris didn't have much to work with to begin with, but at the same time, the writers ensured that she is almost as soulless as Captain Marvel. It doesn't help that she affirms irrefutably evil acts for a second time for Carol like she did for Wanda a few years ago. And maybe that's my biggest gripe with this character. She seems to have no understanding of the concept or the term evil. She has willfully ignored or brushed off the mind control of an entire town, making Wanda's actions about herself rather than the mind enslavement of an entire group of people. She also ignores the harm that Carol has caused for Hala, and instead chooses to fixate on the knowledge that her aunt figure never came back to visit her. Photon truly has these strangest priorities and is incomplete both as a superhero and as a person. Her motivations are never really clear. Her ideals certainly weren't from the beginning, and her future as a hero is definitely in question given just how irrelevant the writers have made her in the grand scheme of the MCU. No doubt we'll be seeing more of her as she is now in the X-Men universe, but if I never saw her again, I wouldn't be too torn up about it. And that's when you know that the character that you wrote has no staying power, and probably never will unless serious changes are made. And finally, we have Robin, from the infamous television show by Director X, Robin Hood. I was only able to get through one episode of this snooze fest, and the parts that I were awake for were either laughably illogical or else mind-boggling. Maybe the best example of this is Robin's mom informing her that she has refilled the condom jar in case Robin needs it. Not only is this highly disturbing, it's a pathetically ham-fisted excuse or attempt at making Robin as modern as possible. I didn't realize that a sign of modernity was being as promiscuous as you can possibly be, or having so little respect for yourself that you'd expose yourself to people with all potential for horrific STDs. And yet they decided that if they took away the signature weapon of Robin of Locksley, well, there would be nothing to distinguish the parallels between the true Robin Hood and this bizarre bisexual activist 2023 version. So we have a bunch of thugs dressed in tarps, calling themselves the Hood, and using bows and arrows, and not even impressive bows and arrows, but some odd form of handmade crossbow that looked like they were the kind used to support tomato plants in your dad's back garden every summer. But maybe the worst aspect of Robin is that she's not a character. She's an ideology saying words. She was not created because the director believed in making a character that people would relate to. Instead, she's just a vehicle for Director X's own personal ideology and political leanings, a way for him to stay relevant in this bizarre culture war that has exhausted so many people. She wasn't meant to have people root for her. She was meant to send a message. Black people are oppressed, the police are constantly racist, and every single white man is bad. At this point, that sort of message is the ideological equivalent of Charlie Brown's teacher saying words. Robin, though she is the most political of the female characters created this year, is by no means the most exhausting. All of them together have that front pretty well cornered. I am certain that there were other terrible female characters in 2023, but these are the ones that stuck out to me the most, both for their poor writing, the blatant ideological leanings, and the lack of priorities that all of them seem to possess for anything important. 2023 was a doozy of a year for the women. Let's hope 2024 is better. Thanks so much for watching this video, guys. Be sure to tell me your thoughts down in the comment section, and let the conversations begin. Until next time, everyone.